Hello, everyone. Welcome. It is the fourth in a four-part climate talk series that we're doing with Marjan Finlayson from Climate Edu. Edu. And today we are talking about the world, talking about climate change, but we're looking at conflict. We know that there is a lot of conflict happening in the world. In addition to conflict, we will talk about specifically about genocide and about mining of resources and settler colonialism and all of these different issues in more specific terms in relation to their impact on the environment and what they are doing to really intensify and speed up climate change and what climate justice should look like for us in the Bahamas, across the Caribbean region, in small island developing states, looking at our friends in the Pacific and the entire world. As always, Marjan, turning to you to tell the people who you are and what you do.
Hello, everyone, again. Thank you for joining us for the last part. I'm Marjan Finlayson. I am part of Climate Bahamas, which is really me. Also working on a PhD focused on ocean heat content in the Mediterranean Sea and the university here. And yeah, I've been doing climate change work for about 10 years now. So very happy to continue to talk to Alicia, who is like the best interviewer. And conversation holder. So happy to talk about this. Well, not happy, but you know what I mean.
It's good to be having the conversation about things that are happening that we can't necessarily stop by ourselves, right? Because we would if we could. I don't think we really need a precursor here, right? Like everyone by now knows what is happening, and we may as well just get right into it. There's genocide taking place in Palestine by Israel, right? Like let's not mince words here. It's a genocide, not a conflict, not a war, a genocide against Palestinian people. They are being systematically murdered, and the land is being destroyed by Israel, which has been creating a settler colony, right? This is all about land. And one of the many situations where people will use religion as an excuse for what they're doing. Where have we seen that before? Everywhere, all the time. Transatlantic trade and enslaved people. You know, the ways that people use religion to explain atrocities that they create and continue and don't want to see end. Why is this something that we need to bring into the climate conversation?
I think there are several reasons why it's important to talk about it, partially because, one of the things I tell people, especially now when we're talking about the summer, like hurricane seasons, is that you can connect the heating of the thing that scientists like to talk about is the warm oceans. And you can connect the warm oceans to the heating atmosphere, and the atmosphere you can connect to the emissions of greenhouse gases. And one of the things that we can predict with the models that we talked about before was just how many, the amount of gases that were stuck in a period of time that we know would affect in the future, what that would look like. We don't really, I think that in all of the climate models and scenarios, there's not really one scenario that happens when it explains how much CO2 and other greenhouse gases are expelled when there are constant bombs. When there's constant and consistent bombing in one particular space, that feels like it's only happening here. So it's not really going to affect the rest of the world. But if there's a consistent bombing that's happening in Palestine, for example, at unprecedented levels for over a year now, we should expect to see those greenhouse gases are going to make their way into the atmosphere and stay there again for a very long period of time. Because these greenhouse gases they don't die after a year. They stay there for many years, decades, centuries. They're there in the atmosphere. And that contribution is going to heat up the atmosphere more. It's going to create, it's going to close the atmospheric window for like more of these gases to go out into space, which means that it's going to get warmer, which means that the oceans, like some of that carbon dioxide is going to go into the ocean. There's actually a study that showed like, now, I don't want to misquote it because I actually didn't read this, but there was a headline I saw that showed like there's been no absorption of carbon by trees and oceans on the same level that it's been years ago, this year in particular. So when we reach a point where our carbon sinks, which would include forests, oceans, and to some extent land, when we see that those carbon sinks aren't working in the same way that they were before, there is no place for those gases to go except to stay inside the atmosphere, which means we should expect to see more heat. And with more heat, we should expect to see more extreme weather events. And one of those weather events being these intense, rapid, intensifying storms and hurricanes and regular rain. We expect to like be heavier and all this other stuff. So it's like, it seems like it's not a big deal to us in the Caribbean because it's like so far away. But of course, like when we take away the social aspect of like why this is important, why we should care about it, when you consider like the physical, climate, scientific reasons why this is a big issue, part of it is because science is supposed to be apolitical, right? But it's not. Science is political. It's just how it is. It's how it's always been. When you consider that we live in a space and a place where people don't really like to connect the politics of things to the climate science, and when you do all these different climate scenarios, right, you have people who are approaching it with economic ideas and like mostly global northern perspective on like what would happen in the next 5 years if we all were nationalists, if we were all decided to follow a sustainable future, all the stuff that was really coming from a perspective of the global north in general. War, conflict, genocide, ecocide is never really on the forefront of like why these things are a problem. Because in addressing that, you'd have to address so many other complexities and like why these things aren't copacetic, like why this isn't how you'd have to address, like I always say the wrong name, but I like David White's book, Ecocide, Kill the Corporation Before It Kills Us, because the book really makes an extreme point on like how profitable all of these things are in terms of war, in terms of ecocide, in terms of genocide, why it makes such a huge profit, and how that affects the environment and also climate change, right? So there's a direct connection that we expect from what's happening in Palestine right now that we should expect to happen in the near future. The problem is, how do we predict it if our models have not seen that before? If our models have not expected like it would be this, and like even if you had a model that was expected to see like what would happen if there was war in the Middle East, I don't think anyone could have expected the amount of CO2 that was emitted in the last year since October 2023, the amount of white phosphorus in the atmosphere, the amount of dead animals, people, land. Like, I don't think any of that's been predicted. And like right now, what's happening in Lebanon, and then also the possibility of nuclear war with Iran, like all this stuff happening at one time. How's that going to affect our atmosphere? How's that going to affect our ocean? That's not something that we've been sitting on and going, okay, in the climate science, like modeling world, this is something that could happen because no one could see the future. So to me, it's really concerning because it's like, oh, well, the models are saying one thing, but if we didn't really account for this thing happening, so it might happen at a more accelerated rate, So that is why there's like a direct connection that I've been trying to explain to people. When I send like warnings out in the fin forecast, I'm always like, listen, so we said hurricanes might be this way. I want y'all to be realistic. It might be worse. So I'm always, very unnerved by that, just because there's no way to properly predict what would happen now as a result of what has happened in the past year.
And you mentioned the fin forecast. Can you tell folks what that is and how they can get that?
Sure. The Fin Forecast is my weekly newsletter that goes out every Sunday. And basically, it's a newsletter that gives a weekly description on what the weather is going to be like in the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos. I don't know, from like the Sunday I send it out to the next Saturday, and it covers the weather. It gives you a little bit of astrology. If you're a subscriber, it gives you a birthday shout out. It also tells you what's going to happen in the sky with astronomy. And then, of course, because I love hurricanes were my thing, I give hurricane news as well. So whatever's happening, whatever the hurricane warnings are, it's in the fin forecast as well. And we also like to connect people to resources. We, me, myself, and I like to connect people to resources of like where you could find all the different data for different like weather information that you could get that's specifically about the Bahamas and Caribbean. And you can subscribe if you go to finforecast.substack.com and follow at finforecast. I think that's it, at finforecast on Instagram. So
finforecast.substack.com.
yes, let me double check that because I have been known to say the wrong. Yes, finforecast.
Okay.
.substack.com. It's forecasts with an S.
Forecasts.
Mm-hmm.
Enunciate. All right. Yeah, so I can definitely see what you were saying earlier about the forecasting that we've seen so far that are making certain suggestions to us about what life on this planet will be like in the next decades. But there is no accounting for bombs being dropped, airstrikes, the devastation of entire lands, right? With just poison, just toxins entering the soil, entering the earth. So probably at an accelerated rate, moving much faster in a downward spiral than has been predicted. So we really need to be aware of that even the predictions that we've had for the last few years aren't going to show us where we are today and where we're going to be in the years to come. Mm-hmm. Given that, COP is coming up, right? The big climate conference will be held in Azerbaijan in just a few weeks. Have you been to COP before?
I have not.
Okay. You've heard about COP. You know what COP is like.
I know what COP. I've had a lot of people who've gone, and I was always like, "Wow, this looks tough." I don't think I don't have the right temperament to go. I really think
yeah. And then there's sort of like two kinds of people who go to COP, which is like, well, there's more than two kinds, but kind of most people fall into one of these two streams, which is very much following the policy conversation and they call them negotiations. That's not really what it is, but negotiations that are going on behind mostly closed doors. And then there are people who are events, the side events, the parallel events, engaging with NGOs, being in spaces where NGOs are mixed with policymakers and legislators and having conversations about what is happening on the ground, what should be happening on the ground. I'm wondering if you think at COP this year there will be conversations about genocide, about war and conflict, and what that means for the work that so many people are doing to slow climate change and to work toward climate justice. Do you think that this is going to come up in that space?
Yes, but I don't think it will be productive in the similar vein that I don't think that like COPs can truly be productive. I think that right now that the way that the UN is like speaking about like the genocide happening in Gaza and like how there's like expectation for it to stop, and like we have like rulings by the International Court of Justice, rulings by the International Criminal Court that this is morally wrong and the rest of the world should not function in this way. The issue is with COPs is there's profit to be made in genocide. There's profit to be made in war. When you read about like how much money goes into arms sales, how much money goes into private military outfits, how much money there is in these particular Western mostly like sales, like you can't really mess up the machine in the same way with COP, right? There's a lot of money that goes into oil and gas. you know, and it doesn't matter what kind of gas. It could be what is the one? Natural gas. It could be coal. Like they were trying to eradicate. I think COP26. That's the one that really got me, where they were trying to eradicate coal, and it was like, girl, coal. What about fossil fuels? Like that seems a little over twist. But you know what I mean? Like there's money to be made with fossil fuel, oil, liquid natural gas, all of these different mechanisms that have been making money all of this time. There's not really an effort to stop that. And in the same, so with oil and gas, with weapons, with genocides and wars, because there's profit behind it, I think that there will be people who would be like, we support the ICJ ruling that there should stop, and that Palestinians in particular have a right to live in self-determination, all that right to self-determination. And like people who will be there saying like this shouldn't happen in the Democratic Republic of Congo, this shouldn't happen in Sudan. Like people will be there making those arguments. But I also feel like there will be people in the same way. There are people who are there saying, we don't want to die from climate change. There will be people who will say, okay, you don't want to die, but hear me out. Maybe a little bit, because we still need to mine for oil and gas. I know you want Palestinians to have the right to self-determination, but hear me out on this. We still want to sell weapons. So what do we do? You know what I mean? And a lot of times people still want to keep things going in the way that they are people with more power, right? Like you have a particular COP. I could be wrong about this, but I feel like there are a lot of companies, not just NGOs, like companies for profit that show up at least at these events, show up at COP, do a lot of sponsorship. So it's clear, like, we are trying to help save the planet together, but there's an insidious
oil and gas companies, people. Oil and gas companies come to COP and have pavilions.
To be
and
like,
are invited by some states.
Because we want to, you know, show that we're all on the same page. So that's why I'm like, I think the conversation will come up and everyone will be like, yes, this is morally wrong. But like, you know, do talking with your right hand and do whatever so your left hand can't see. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not in sincerity. So, I mean, I would hope there's conversations about the direct effects of climate change, but I don't think that's going to be a conversation. I don't think that's something that people will be discussing. I don't think people will really see the connection between loss and damage when it comes to actual like genocide and ecocide that people are living through, right? Because of like, if things could happen in Latin America for similar reasons, for just agricultural farming and go on for years and years and years without there being any interruption, I don't see how, I mean, essentially colonialism, neocolonialism in this effect is something that would be stopped, right? And I mean, you see that with how like the media treats particular activists that came out at one point saying climate change needs to stop, and people going, oh my God, Greta is so cute. Like, she's so adorable. And now she's on the world stage saying, listen, genocide is wrong. Capitalism is the thing that's going to like ruin us and like keep the planet horrible. Like, we have to stop these things. And now it's like, whatever. She gets, like, she's standing with indigenous peoples. She's doing this work with Palestinians. She's doing this work around the world, trying to get like more voices to the table. And now you have like giant media outlets that once saw her as a wonderful human being, seeing her as like annoying. Like, we don't want you to have a platform anymore because it's going against, you know, business as usual. So
yeah, from cute to annoying real fast. Real fast. And a part of it, like you said, is not seeing the connection between these issues. And I think this is something that we haven't quite gotten very good at yet. Showing people how connected all of these issues are before we even bring climate into the conversation. When we look at Palestine, we look at what's happening in Gaza, what's happening to the Palestinian people, it's difficult to get people here to care about that. People might say, yeah, sad. Yeah, that's probably bad. And then go back to, you know, typing on their computer or grocery shopping or whatever, just going through the motions of the day without thinking about what we have in common, right? Not just the struggles that we have in common, because let's be real. We're still in the Bahamas, in the Caribbean, struggling with colonialism, right? And we like to throw around sort of post-colonialism. It's still colonialism. We still right in there,
Indeed.
right?
Indeed.
Independence, great, sure, with a Princess Margaret Hospital, and just down to the names of the streets and institutions that we rely on. Colonialism is still very much here. And somehow we're not able to make that connection to other people who are experiencing the same form of ongoing oppression in a very real way, and in a more tangible, more quantifiable way than we experience it even. It's hard to relate to that struggle, and maybe even harder to see our liberation as linked. That we have the same work to do, and if we sit and allow all of these atrocities to happen in Palestine, in Sudan, in Democratic Republic of the Congo, in all of these different parts of the world, we are saying that we are comfortable with where we are. Even though what is literally being said is we need to worry about ourselves.
Yes.
But we're not effectively worrying about ourselves or getting ourselves out of our situations if we're ignoring what's going on everywhere else.
And not concerned. I mean, I read your article in the Tribune about that. It was really good. I posted it on my Facebook so people could see. But I think exactly true. It's really hard to get people to. My first thing is like getting people to care is always like it's very hard to get people to care outside of their regular daily life, 9 to 5. Like whatever struggle I have to go through, I am going through it. You know what I mean? Like I have to go to work, and then I go to work, and it's a hard day. I come home, I have to feed a bunch of people. People need the light bill have to get paid. I don't know if that's going to get turned off. I don't know if I have enough money for water. I'm going to this job, and I'm really upset. And like my world is so chaotic, you know what I mean? Like, or if it's not chaotic, it's something I have to curate so it's not a chaotic mess. But there's always going to be a shoe dropping in my life because of the structures and the systems that have been, like a lot of times, built by this neo-colonial and also like past colonial things that have happened that have gotten us to a point where like for regular Bahamian who like lives in a particular area of like say a Lutheran, that's where I was. I saw a lot of like things that made me go, oh, that is different. Like a lot of things you have to do to survive. Like once you can't really move outside of the survival mindset. So I think for a lot of people, once they get to a point of comfort, right? It is that thing of like, yeah, I need to worry about myself and worry about myself only because the only people who were looking out for me was me and my small circle of whoever. And like anybody else who is even like my countrymen is like against me, right? So it's like, once we operate in survival mode and I get a little comfortable, I'm still in survival mode to try to make it to the next day. So like that's one thing. So that's like where I start my little circle of like, this is how people exist. And then you get out of that circle and people have to immediately like converse with their community. And like that community consists of who was in church and where I got a lot of education, like what happened in church, what happened in school, what happened here. And like who shares my ideologies that have been built off of particular structures of colonialism, religion, all these things. Like how my ideology has been built. Where do I get my sources of information from? What structures happen? Because I think like even in when we talk about like the basic bits, but when we talk about like racism as a thing that has affected people, right? So like in 2020, when COVID-19 happened and people, back to like taking care of each other because we don't want to die, masking everywhere. But then also dealing with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, like that happening all over the world and people's reactions, like particular people who identify as Black, all having similar reactions of having and sharing similar anger. Or like just like built-in anger. I feel like a lot of people who have historically lived through like such difficult racist times, like people who I know who are like 70, 60, who talk to me about things that happened to them, like it's still lingering there. You know what I mean? Like there's still an anger that they could identify with like Americans who are dealing with that thing. So it wasn't too far off, but at the same time, there would be like, I can identify with the American struggle and like the police being wrong to them. But at the same time, I can't connect police brutality in my own country because anti-Blackness is global. I can't connect racism happening in this country because what certain radio host said, racism don't exist in Bahamas. Untrue. Very untrue. Very strange thing to say. But like racism doesn't exist here. So like they're like different, like when we consider like even how education has worked in our country, right? So like I did the BGCSE, history BGCSE. And one of the things that was always like said in the history BGCSE when we talk about slavery was always slavery was better in the Bahamas. So strange, such a strange thing. But it would always be like in that one question that was like, slavery was better in the Bahamas because slaves picked cotton. Enslaved people picked cotton. And in Jamaica, enslaved people dealt with cane sugar, which is more laborious. And it was like, okay, but also Americans, enslaved people would have picked cotton too. Yes, but the temperature, the climate in the Bahamas was nicer because there were breezes. And I was like, so you're like, you are essentially saying to me, a 14, 30, 15-year-old kid, that actually racism, slavery wasn't so bad here because, you know, slave masters used to teach enslaved people religion and had better relationships than they had anywhere else in the world, which was kind of insane to say. Sorry, ableist, but kind of weird to say because why would you say that? But you could see like that kind of programming and on top of like the different messaging you get from all these different places make it hard to connect to these different things happening around us, including like things that would happen dealing with anti-Blackness because it's never been so bad here. It's never been so bad in the Bahamas. So when you introduce the Palestinian conflict that has been going on for years and years and years, I think they say 76 years this year, right? When you introduce that conflict and introduce that conversation, which is already kind of like when you like Malcolm X on the fringe side of conversation, when you introduce that conversation to people, it's already difficult because they can't identify with people who look like them strongly, right? When it comes to like Black excellence, yes, I can identify with that. When it comes to Black struggle and like issues that are happening in other places, it's a little harder to make that connection, I think, for people, again, because of like how programming, education, just like survival mode works. So when you see people actually going through this kind of struggle, it's like, one, y'all don't look like me. Two, I don't really know about y'all history because again, I've been taught that this is just conflict that happened among here because we've been taught for so many years what's been going on in the Middle East is so complicated and it's hard to understand. And like at some point the US president was Black, so obviously he would never do wrong. It's like a whole thing, right? So I think it's hard for people to make that connection because yeah, they just we're in survival mode. You accept the information that's presented to you, and that's how you move forward. Now, when you see it on your phone, it's like, okay, I can't understand this, and this is frustrating to me. But what can I do? And also, if I do something, it's not going to make a difference. So it's like it's kind of like there are people who are concerned, who have that concern, but there are people who are also like, but it doesn't matter because I'm over here and I can't like help people. So I don't know. I think it's a range of emotion where people who actually legitimately don't care. There are people who connect the state of Israel to actually religion, like like this is the Israel that God and Jesus was talking about. It is not. And then there are a range of people who just feel like they don't have any power in the situation at all. Like they don't have power in their own life, so how they could help somebody? You know what I mean? How could they help someone else? So I think it's a factual range. Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely get stuck in our own experiences,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's a way that if we're struggling, all we can focus on is our specific struggle. I cannot
Yes.
think about how you're struggling, much less how our struggles are connected.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a way that people who don't have certain struggles don't see it
Mm-hmm.
and cannot fathom that struggles outside of their reality exist. There were some comments on the little clip that we posted from the third talk in this session where people were questioning the idea that there could be people living in New Providence who have not seen the beach. People just seriously just like, what are you talking about? How is that possible? This island is 21 by 7 miles. And will argue down, right? That it is impossible to live here
It's
and not
unbelievable.
see the beach. I mean,
Yeah.
there are so many people who probably still think that there are no people without passports. You know,
Yes.
when everything started rolling out where to get anything done in this country you needed to have a passport, and we started raising this issue that everyone doesn't have a passport, people were
Mm-hmm.
like, what do you mean everybody doesn't have a passport?
Mm-hmm.
Well, everyone doesn't have $50 or whatever it costs to apply for that, or time to stand in the line. You know, back then, maybe sometimes now too, you have to stand in the line 5, 6 in the morning to get a number to ensure that you would be served on the same day. Get time off during the
Mm-hmm.
workday to do your interview. But also, everyone should not have a passport because a passport is for travel. But now we are forced to get passports.
Yeah.
And
And
now
you
I
know
think
the
we're getting to that point again where people don't understand that everybody can't afford a passport. Everyone doesn't need one. Everyone does not go to Miami every summer.
which is interesting, right? Because like in other places you just have a state ID.
That's it.
I mean we have the like we have the national insurance card, right? Like it's like, oh,
Does it?
I don't know.
But
I mean, no.
let's talk about, somebody asked that we give a specific example of a person
Mm-hmm.
who has never seen the beach. And clearly we're not going to name somebody and say this, I know this
Mm-hmm.
person who's never seen the beach, but can create the circumstance, paint the picture
Sure,
of
sure,
a
sure. I
person
actually
who's
can
never
give
seen the beach.
I can give an example of someone who I didn't personally know, but like so my sister worked in a particular institution that served folks who were children really who lived in Over the Hill, right? The Over the Hill area. So she worked with them, and one of the children was like super into the work they did. Was like really, really. They worked in the same area over the hill, and they'd have conversations, and like she just my sister's so cool. But anyways, like she'd be talking to them and just be like, yeah, so what happened? Like, how you doing? Like, you guys going to the beach this Sunday for whatever reason? Because I think at that time it was like beach season was coming up, and this guy was like, I never, no, I've never been there, never been to the beach. And she was like, you literally could just walk. And he was like, no, I don't, I've never, because there's like a level of like, I don't know. She thought it was weird, and she was consistently asking like why, and he just was like, it's just not something I've done. So that was something that I think the institution wanted to take on, like bring in these kids who probably have never seen the beach to the actual beach. Because we also have to consider, like, I think a lot of the times people have this idea of how accessible things are to a lot of people. And considering, like, when you're speaking from a place of privilege where you could be on Instagram and have access to the internet to, like, comment, this doesn't make sense, and recognizing, like, not everyone has that privilege and access that you do, it's hard to actually, like, see it, right? But, like, if your only means of getting by is, say, like, walking a place and you have to walk where there are like dangerous cars everywhere. You have to walk where the heat is getting hotter. You have to walk without adult supervision and you don't know who's out there. You know what I mean? And when you get to the particular beach, you may feel uncomfortable because it's occupied by this group of tourists who you've probably learned in school need to be treated a particular way. And you may feel internally less worthy to be in that particular and occupy the particular space with those people. Now, I mean, you could argue with me on that. That's fine. I understand. But I'm saying, like, it's not as easy as, oh, they could just catch the bus to the beach. Well, you need money to catch the bus. Oh, you could just walk. It's hot. You want adult supervision. Like, there are a lot of factors. There are a lot of places, like, a lot of things that would tell someone you can't leave this particular area because you don't know who's out there. You can't leave this particular area because it might be dangerous because you run into X, Y, and Z. You know what I mean? There are a lot of obstacles to get to that beach. Another example is like in Eleuthera, you gotta have a car to go to the beach. Like when I lived there, you needed to have a car to go to the beach because it wasn't like you got to walk. You had to go through some bushes and brambles to get where you were trying to go. And if you were going to like a particularly nice beach, which would be like the area that was taken up by uh certain resorts and hotels, you needed a car to get there. You needed a car to drive past the gate to get there and go to the beach. But for a lot of kids, they needed to get on the back of like where I worked. there'd be like a truck or a van that would have to carry some kids who lived in the neighborhood to that beach because you couldn't just walk there. The access to it is so difficult to get there just by foot. And even with your car, it's a little dangerous because your tires are going to get destroyed. So it was like, it's easy to be like, I can access it because I can make this walk and I have this car. I like just consider what the things you have to do to get to the beach and try to apply that to someone who is not in that region. Like someone who lives somewhere in Gladstone Road might have a harder time getting to the beach than someone who lives in the Eastern Road. Just things to consider.
Many things to consider that I think just generally don't come to people's minds.
Mm-hmm.
Right? A lot of times it's not that people are like, I don't want to believe anything, it's just, I am just caught up in my own circumstance. I can't imagine that anyone else exists. And I thought it was interesting too, that in the example that you thought of, it was a child. And in many cases, we don't think about children as people. So I think in people's imagination, they're picturing like probably a 40-year-old man,
Mm-hmm.
right? As a person.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no way that there's a 40-year-old man on this island that's never been to the beach, which we could argue about that too. But great. Thank you for sharing that example and like a very real life one to give people a little bit of understanding of the context, and that contexts are different in different parts of the island. And we can see the way that race and class both impact where we live, if we move, and how we move around the island. And if you take that and you can map that onto the world, right? Like the ways that we move in the world, who is paying attention to our issues, who cares about what's happening in our countries, who is able to take action and who actually wants to take that action, and then who's going to actually go through the steps to do that. And that's one of the reasons that we are having these conversations. And I know that you have some campaigns to let people know about.
Thank you for that, because we would have been here all day. Okay, just wanted to say the ultimate goal, once again, of these sessions is to spotlight ways to help people in need. A lot of people, as I mentioned before, probably do want to help people in dire situations, but are not sure where to start. So while we talk about climate change and give you helpful information, we ask that you make a donation to these GoFundMes among your friends, family, and communities. And the link is tiny.url/SUN That's tinyurl/Sundon. And our spotlights for this session for local GoFundMes will be, regional, will be the Hurricane Beryl Relief Fund for affected Caribbean islands. That's done by a group of nurses regionally that are trying to help people who've been affected by the different islands of the Caribbean. And also internationally, we're looking at Bilal Al-Jalab's journey to safety. Bilal has been in Gaza for a while now and been suffering, try to evacuate if able, but really trying to make food and shelter for himself so he could continue to survive.
Yeah, those are the campaigns that we're highlighting today. Go to that link. And if you're interested in specifically supporting people in Palestine and the work that's happening there, you can go to Linktree, linktr.ee/funds for Gaza. And they have a rotating list of campaigns. They kind of move them around, spread the money around. So you can choose one of those campaigns to support, to directly assist people who are in Gaza and people who are sending resources to Gaza as well right now. Last time we talked a little bit about consumer habits, right? We talked about fashion.
Yes.
And because we're talking about international affairs, conflict, genocide, I would like to talk about technology.
Yes.
And there are two ways we can go. We might only be able to cover one right now, but one of them is just devices themselves. And the way that there seems to be an addiction, I think we can call it an addiction, to replacing devices that don't need replacing, right? Just because there's a new XYZ phone, we got to go get it. Just because there's a new version of the blah, blah, blah computer or tablet, got to go get it. Just because this thing is a little slimmer or this thing charges wirelessly, got to go get it. What does this mean? Well, first of all, for the people in Congo, right?
Yes.
3 and 4 year olds, bare hands,
Yes.
right? Mining.
Horrible. Yeah, horrible to see actually. I think my dad's an Aquarius, right? So everything technology, my whole life, he's been very big on we're gonna get the technology. Like I was there, let me age myself. I was there helping set up the modem with the internet back in the year 1999. It was so exciting. Like that's like so like for years, we've been like on that vibe. And then one day, like the day I realized technology something was wrong was like somebody was talking about Google Homes, and my dad was like, "Oh no, that is where that is where the sidewalk ends. Something about that is too evil." And I was like, what are you talking about? So there's always been like a part of me like from there when I was like, okay, so maybe we've reached peak technology, but in terms of just like technology usage, right? We live in a world now where where to approach this? I think when it comes down to technology, I think we've gotten to a point where we're always capitalizing on the next best thing. And there's a lot of profit that comes from us going for the next best thing, spending a lot of time on the internet, using the internet as a way to share information, but also contentify our lives to be the information that can be sold in different spaces and places. Um, it's it's concerning because there's also this, I think, I don't want to say this intentional, but I think it's an intentional thing that's being done. We could bring back to like how genocide like coexists with climate change, but there's also a connection, an intentional disconnect that happens between how the technology is made versus how we get the technology. It's the same thing with fashion. How you get your clothes from this fashion warehouse versus who had to make it and like what working conditions look like. And I think that like this large disconnect for the sake of convenience has put us in a place where it's like you don't care. You really don't care. With the Congo, it's interesting, right? Because it is anti-blackness that has led a lot of people not to care about people who are suffering in this way. I literally think it's interesting as well because like I saw like when I saw like videos of kids mining in the Congo, I immediately was like looking at I saw the same similar scene in like this DC comic show movie thing, Black Adam, for like 5 minutes when I was watching it. And I was like, it's the same thing, but people are lighter. So it's always interesting when you see that kind of issue. Um, but this giant disconnect between us and technology and the effects technology is going to have in long term to people personally, community, climate, environment. I mean, it's connected to agriculture, it's connected to fashion, it's connected to all these things. But the technology, I think, is more concerning. Not saying nothing else is, but technology is concerning because there is a concern for like when does it end? When is there a stop? Like there shouldn't be more phones in the world than people. I was telling this to someone when they were talking to me about electric cars. And when you consider, I think cars are a good example of it too. Because if you consider how cars were made, right, versus how cars are made now, if you want to get rid of your car, you would, like, say you take your old car to a car lot or like to a junkyard, back in the day, talk about them, but you go to a junkyard and you dismantle the car for parts or whatever. There are certain parts, like parts of the engine and stuff, that have to stay in that place. And the metals that come from the engine of like a car that was built in 1950 or 1960, that metal would leach into the ground and that would cause poison in the actual ground. That would eventually affect the water table. That would eventually affect people, right? So, because the metal doesn't go away. Like once you create something, it doesn't go away. It's not recycled. It's always there. So when you consider these cars now that are being built with the same cobalt that's being used from the Congo and these different places, eventually when you want to upgrade your car, what happens to the other one? Do you know what I mean? Like eventually that's going to go to a junkyard, that's going to leach in the ground, it's going to cause problems. Most people can't afford to like switch up cars like that, but you could afford to switch up your phone. So what happens to the phone that you get rid of? How's that going to affect the environment? And then you consider like who who's at risk, like who's dying for you to have this particular phone, and is it worth it for everybody to have beautiful pictures on Instagram? Like how many lives is that worth? I don't know. I think it's complicated. And when you introduce AI into the whole theory now, it's kind of concerning because I feel like we're getting to a point where technology has hit a cap, and I don't think people like I feel people are seeing it now because there's an argument online about how we don't own anything. Like all these people are dying, and I don't own anything. Like I play streaming for everything on my phone. That's the one thing I own, but I don't own any DVDs. I don't own any I don't own anything. Use the pay subscription for printing now. Like what I mean it's clearly capitalist, you know? We're all being exploited. They're being exploited worse, but it's like what do we do? I'm just rambling now.
Bottom line, stop buying these phones.
Yeah.
You do
Yeah.
not need a new one
Refurbish.
just because they came
Refurbish.
out with a new one. And a certain company is definitely making their phones obsolete,
Yeah.
right? Like they are
Definitely.
producing new ones and they are doing things to make the older ones not function anymore. And why you would continue to buy phones from a company that does that is definitely far beyond me because I've never bought any phone from that company. But we have to
It's
be
the marketing.
thinking differently. There's nothing special. There's nothing special. Most people who have these phones also have computers that they use to do the things that the phone is so special for doing, right? At the very least, use it until it will not be used anymore.
But it's interesting, right? Because the phones have been integrated in our lives in a way. Because I told my dad, I was like, I'm getting when this phone dies, I'm going back to Nokia and I'm getting my brick phone. I'm done with this stuff. You can't trick me anymore. That's what I want. Because I'm actually going on a anti-digital journey. I'm gonna buy DVDs and CDs going forward. I'm so excited. But there was a point in teaching, when I was a teacher in the US, and there was a point in time where all of the students were transitioning into being allowed to have phones in the school and in class, and they needed to have them there, partially because it was the phones added a sense of security and safety that didn't really exist. Because yes, you could text your mom and dad from school, but if something happens, you know what I mean? So there was we need to have these phones in the classroom because we don't know what's going to happen with these kids because the government is failing us. But there was a whole thing with that. So there was a need to have them because security is necessary for these children. And then there's also a lack of unsupervised activity. It's just the phones have now become integrated in our lives and integrated in a necessity and a need that's kind of false, a false sense of necessity. And I don't know how to encourage everyone to break away from that. Obviously, don't buy a new phone, but when your phone does die, be like me, get a brick Nokia.
Be like my
feel you know what I mean? Get a what did they say? Get a dumb phone. Actually, it'll be better. But I don't think people will see that.
So much better for our mental health as well.
It'll be better for childhood development. I just it'll be so much better for children. The amount of children who will play Snake on your phone and then go back to coloring, we need to get back there. So
yeah, there are changes that need to happen. And we only have a little bit of time left, but I think just to reiterate, when you're looking at these phones, when you're looking at these devices, think about the resources that it takes to manufacture them and who is doing the mining, and specifically think about Congo. Very specifically think about Congo, because the biggest difference that we can make is in our own spending, in our consumption. And you think of yourself as one person, you think, well, I buy this phone in the Bahamas, it don't matter. Okay, great. Where did it come from? We didn't make that here.
And I want to add to that too, because we've talked a lot about people in terms of getting exploited, lands getting exploited, but there's also animals are also being affected. I don't know if you've seen this, but there's a recent report that came out that I think biodiversity is down by 73% in the entire world. 73% of wildlife is now gone. We've gotten to a point now where it's biodiversity is dangerously low. And of course you can imagine in these specific areas where you're like building phones, like mining and doing this stuff, a lot of habitats, a lot of animals also are in trouble. So you're dealing with people who are in danger. You're dealing with animals in danger. You're dealing with the land that's in danger, all because, you know, you want to get the iPhone 16 to take cute pictures. Like, all of this stuff is happening. So,
And it's just not
yeah,
that important. It's not that important to get the new phone.
no,
It's
definitely.
really not.
Listen, when y'all follow me and get y'all and keep y'all brick phone for real, like, you'll see it. Like, they have
Mhm.
WhatsApp on those phones now, so you really you don't need this anymore.
There you go. Before we
Yeah.
go, I do want to talk a little bit about AI, the fact that
Mm-hmm.
it's not intelligent, that it is stealing. It's stealing people's work and like chewing it up and spitting it back out and
Mm-hmm.
giving you garbage, but you love it. Chat GPT has become very, very popular. People are using it all the time and for nonsense. I don't really support using it for sense either, but I don't think people are aware of the dangers, not just
Yes.
of AI, right, but of Chat GPT and what that is doing to the environment. Can you give us a little something in a short period of
Yeah.
time?
Yeah, okay, ChatGPT, don't use it. It's using so much energy and electricity to fuel it to use it, and also so much water usage. If you look up the amount of liters of water needed to fuel ChatGPT when you ask one question, it's a lot more than you would think. ChatGPT, I mean, it's not getting all the like it's stealing information from the internet, and half the time it doesn't answer the right questions, but it is taking a lot of energy. It's taking a lot of electricity. Think about the emissions that come with that electricity usage. And also water. When the water is used and taken back into the environment, once it's like put into an electronic like grid thing, it causes a lot of pollution. So the water's polluted, it's being used, it's poison, people can't drink it, animals can't drink it. It's a whole thing. So yes, I am anti chat GPT as well. I literally just talked to one of my friends about it and I was like, friend, it's enough of this. Also, just on a like teacher level of things, super concerned about ChatGPT and people's use of it because like, you know, getting all the wrong answers. So read books instead. Don't use ChatGPT.
Study your work.
Go back to the
Grandparents,
encyclopedia actually.
study your work, read books, encyclopedias included.
Mm-hmm.
Even search. Even search has gone to hell. It
Yes.
is so
Yes.
hard to get sensible, usable results now with the way that AI has crept into search systems and functions.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you could AI is the whole complicated. Yeah,
It's not
I'm
that
not a big
complicated.
AI person.
It's not that
You know,
complicated.
like,
Read
I
Ruha
feel
Benjamin, everybody. Ruha Benjamin. Race After Technology and Viral
mm-hmm,
Justice.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Read those books.
Yes. Also follow at Climate and Color on Instagram and Facebook. She is a person who's focused on climate and technology, and she's also like Ghanaian, British, and she knows all types of things. She's super smart.
What's the IG name?
Climate in Color. I think it's
Climate in
color with a
Color.
U because she's
Yes, the
British.
British way. The British way. Put that U in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we are going to connect again. This is the last in this 4-part series. It was very informative, pretty fun because you're pretty funny, actually. Lots of people are like, she's funny. And I'm like, I know.
Thank
But this
you.
isn't the end, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna stay in touch. We won't stop speaking to each other after this. And we actually have plans already to have a conversation about a very specific aspect. It's like, where did the word go? A very specific aspect of climate change and climate justice
Mm-hmm.
during the global 16 days campaign, which starts on November 25th, which is International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and ends on December 10th, which is Human Rights Day. So look out for a conversation with Marjan happening somewhere in that period between November 25th and December 10th of this year, and many, many more events that we will be hosting and facilitating during that period, focused on rage, very righteous rage, and anti-resilience, because no, We should not have to be strong and bounce back and act like nothing ever happened as individuals, because we are human beings. We are not machines.
Yes.
So we're gonna
Yes.
dig into that and talk about that a lot more. Marjan, do you want to plug the campaigns again? Let people know where to go, what to do.
Sure do. Okay, so just to let people know again, this is the last one, and you can find this recording on all of Equality Bahamas' social media. Yay! You can find a list of GoFundMe campaigns and at tinyurl.com/sundawn, capital S, capital D. You could also go to Funds for Gaza, or even look at Operation Olive Branch if you want to help people who are specifically in Palestine right now. The spotlights for this session, again, are the Hurricane Barrel Relief Fund for affected Caribbean islands, and also Bilal Al-Jiblab's Journey to Safety.
Awesome sauce. And then where can people connect with you?
Yes, you can connect with me on Instagram and Twitter. I don't really use Twitter like that, so maybe not Twitter, at Marjan F, or on Instagram at FinForecasts, where you could also subscribe to my weekly newsletter. And it's not as depressing, I promise. We talk about the weather and it's really fun. I promise.
We promise. It's so good.
It's so fun. Like, last time our theme was like chiller. It was chiller nights with the thriller theme because it's Halloween. It's very fun.
Sign up, people. Sign up. Don't forget, if you're not already, to follow Equality Bahamas on all the things at Equality242. That's on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And then youtube.com/Equality242 to access this and all recordings of our sessions. My goodness, it's already the middle of October, which is pretty wild.
Yes.
Wishing y'all a great remainder of this month. Again, read some books. Two more reading. And they're available in so many different formats. You can get the hard copy, you can get the ebook, you can get audiobooks. Join Feminist Book Club. We have a Feminist Book Club. Sign up at tiny.cc/FBC 2024. The book that we're reading for November is The Resilience Myth. See that? Lined right up to the 16 Days campaign. The Resilience Myth by Soraya Chamali, who has Bahamian roots. Look for the book. Get it in whatever format you like, and then join us to talk about it on November 20th. And there might be a little surprise at the book club, actually. I don't know. You have to sign up and come to see. Thanks for joining us, everybody. See you later.